All right, I think we're going to get started. So I have the pleasure to introduce Aaron Pinero to you today. So I think, Aaron, you've been in the Drupal space for like 15 years or so, something like that. So you told me you had an initial background in web and graphic design, but then somehow you turned into a full stack web developer. So I guess Drupal is a part of the explanation.
Yeah.
Onto what happened. So Aaron today is going to take us in the interesting problem space of handling large data sets at scale and how to manage operations in those data sets at scale and how he managed to use Drupal to do that. I have a little secret to share with you, and I hope, Aaron, you're not going to be too much angry at me to share, but you told me you were a little bit nervous, a little bit anxious about that because it's been a while since you presented in a large conference like that. So just as an encouragement, let's do a quick round of applause for Aaron, and let's get started.
Thank you. And thank you for joining me today for my presentation on using queues to process data from a third-party API. My name is Aaron Pinero. I am Web Services Manager for the Health Sciences Library at Columbia University Medical Center. That is what I look like on the weekends. Today I'm going to tell you a story about a challenge I was given that involved pulling data into Drupal from an API. I'll describe the API. I'll talk about why I decided to use Drupal and queues to manage the interaction with the API, how I used queues, and then I'll briefly show you how you can create custom queues in Drupal. I learned a lot during this process, and so I hope to share some of that with you now. So let's start with the challenge. For the past couple of years, I've been building an institutional bibliography for the medical center. This is a Drupal 11 website with more than 25,000 nodes at the time that this story takes place. Each node describes a scientific journal article that was published by someone at the medical center. So the nodes contain fields for things like the article citation, the journal where the article is published, subject terms, and a PubMed ID, which is a unique identifier for articles that's assigned by the National Library of Medicine. When I demoed this site for prospective users, they said, "We love it, it's great, we just have one little request." It would be great if for each article, you could show the grants that help fund the research published in the article, and for each grant, you could show a list of all the articles published as a result of the funding. It's a reasonable request. As an example, they pointed me to PubMed, which is a bibliographic database from the National Library of Medicine. This is a resource that our users are extremely familiar with. At the bottom of each article page in PubMed, they list the grants and funding that supported the research in the article. And each grant is linked to a canned search that shows all the articles associated with the selected grant. If we look closer, you can see that the grant funding information consists of a project number, which should be unique, and the name of the agency that administered the grant. Now, I think I can build what these users are asking for with taxonomy in Drupal. I can create a grants taxonomy where each term is a grant with the unique project number and the agency name. I can add grants to article nodes using as taxonomy terms, and the taxonomy term page for each grant will list all the articles that are tied with the grant. This sounds reasonable, but to make it work, I will have to face 3 challenges. First, I have to find a source for the grant funding information. Second, I'm going to have to update the existing nodes that are on the website with the grant information. And then I have to be able to add grant information to all the new nodes that are added to the site every month. So let's start with the first challenge, the grant funding information. For this project, I reviewed several possible sources of grant funding information, including PubMed, and some other bibliographic databases. I disqualified most of them because the data was either missing, not structured properly, or was too inconsistently formatted to be reliable. But a colleague actually pointed me at the NIH. So the National Institute of Health is the largest public funder of biomedical research. They publish data on research activities, expenditures, and the results of funded research on their report website. They have a tool called Reporter, which allows users to search a repository of funded research and access publications resulting from their funding. And while Reporter only covers NIH and government grants, it's got good, structured, consistently formatted data. So there's a Reporter API, and it has two endpoints. There's a publications endpoint that accepts a PubMed ID and returns a grant project number. And there's a projects endpoint that accepts the project number and returns detailed information about the grant, including the name of the agency administering it. Now, I noted earlier the descriptions of articles on my website include the PubMed ID. So what I want to be able to do is take that PubMed ID, send it to Reporter, and get the grant project number and the name of the agency. But because of the way Reporter data is set up, I'll actually have to do this in two API requests. One to get the project number from the PubMed ID, and then a second request to get the agency name associated with the project number. But it actually gets more complicated than that, because the relationship between publications and projects is not one-to-one. For any one PubMed ID I submit, I might get no project numbers, I might get tens of project numbers, I might get more than 100 project numbers. It just depends. So retrieving grant information for one publication might look like this. However, I have at least addressed the first challenge. I found a source for grant funding information. So let's talk about the other two challenges. How do I update existing articles? I'm not going to talk about that today. I will mention briefly, in addition to Reporter, NIH provides a tool called Exporter, which allows users to download publication data and grant data in Excel format. So I downloaded 5 years of publication data and 25 years of grant project data from Reporter. And using Microsoft Excel, I was able to match the PubMed IDs from my website with the NIH grant information. I then used the feeds module to upload the grant project data to the website to populate a grants taxonomy. And then I also used the feeds module to update the existing nodes with the grant terms. I mention this only to note that I did try a non-Drupal solution to this problem. It worked fine for the one-time update of the data that was already on the website, but this is not something I really want to have to do every month. And that's all I'm going to say about that. So with those two challenges behind me, I can move on to the final challenge, adding grant information to new articles. So I really want to use this NIH Reporter API to do this and automate the process. But the API has some limitations. The first one is that they allow only one API request per second. Any more than that, and you could get blocked. The other problem is that they limit the maximum number of results returned from any request to 500, which is kind of low in comparison to some of the other APIs I used for this project. There are also some complications here. I already mentioned the relationship between publications and projects is not one-to-one. The other problem is that projects are actually divided into sub-projects. There's another name, but I'll just call it that. And posting a single project number to the project endpoint can return tens or even hundreds of sub-projects. And the agency name that I want is in that sub-project structure. So because of the limit on the number of results I can get, combined with these one-to-many relationships, I can send only a very few PubMed IDs at one time to the publications endpoint. And I can really only send one project number to the project's endpoint at a time. So retrieving all of the project numbers and agency names associated with a single publication could take a really long time. And I risk running into one of these. Fortunately, Drupal provides some APIs for handling time-consuming tasks and breaking them into smaller, manageable chunks. So the Batch API and the Queue API both provide ways to identify a group of items that you want to process and then specify the action that you want to take on those items. Each API handles that item processing differently. So this is the one AI-generated part of this presentation. This is a table from Google Gemini showing the differences between the two APIs. Basically, a batch process is started on user request. It's run in the foreground, and the user gets feedback that's a progress bar and some progress information, and they wait for the process to be completed. Queues, on the other hand, don't start processing immediately. It's handled in the background, so there's no user feedback, but there's also no waiting for it to finish. You've seen batch processes if you've asked for search API to reindex your search index, or if you've done a views bulk operation, or if you've imported a CSV using the feeds module. Some examples of queues are the background indexing that Search API does, the update manager's request for module information, other scheduled cron tasks. So for this challenge, which one did I use? Obviously, I used queues for the interaction with the reporter API, and here's why. First, I want the process to occur automatically. I don't want to have to initiate it myself. Second, I don't need the data to be added immediately. I can wait, it's fine. And then finally, I don't want to wait while the process runs, because it could take a long time. I'd rather Drupal just handle it in the background. So having decided to use queues, how did I use them? So I'll say initially I tried to use a single queue to manage the API interaction for each article. But in hindsight, it's obvious I should have created two queues, which is what I did eventually. So I had one queue to handle the interactions with the publications endpoint, and a second queue to handle the interactions with the project endpoint. So let's diagram this. Here are my two queues. The process starts when an article node is created, and when that happens, I extract the PubMed ID for that article, and I stick it in the first queue. Then when cron runs, the queue process sends that PubMed ID to the publications endpoint, and project numbers are extracted from the response, and those project numbers are then fed into a second queue. Then the next time cron runs, the project number is sent to the project's endpoint, and the agency name is extracted from the endpoint response. And then once I have my project number and my agency name, I can save that information as a new grant taxonomy term and apply that term to the article node. So how do you create a queue like this? To build a custom queue, you need to do two things. You need to define the operation to perform on each queued item, and then add items to the queue, and then Drupal will take care of the rest. So in Drupal, a queue worker is what they call the processor for a queue. The Queue API provides a queue worker base class that is the base implementation for a queue worker. In a custom module, we extend that base class to create a custom queue worker. And inside that custom queue worker, we'll describe how we want queued items to be processed. And so, as an example, the code for queue worker begins with an annotation. That annotation gives the machine name for the queue, gives the human readable name, and it indicates how the queue is going to be processed. In this case, it'll be processed on cron, and it's configured to allow 60 seconds per cron run for queue items to be processed. And then after the annotation is where the queue worker base class is extended. And inside the custom queue worker class, we need one function, the process item function. And that function does exactly what it sounds like. It defines what to do with each queued item. In my case, my process item functions sent data to the reporter API and extracted information from the responses. And so with our process item function defined, all that's left to do is to add items to the queue. To do this, we need Drupal's queue service to get an instance of our custom queue. Then we create an object that will contain the data that we want to put into the queue, and then we take that object and pass it to a create item method that adds it to the queue. And then the next time cron runs, the queued item will be processed in the background as defined in our process item function. And if you want to view and manage your custom queues, there's a Queue UI contributed module. With all that done, I was able to go back to our prospective users and show them this. So this is the homepage of the bibliography, and there's a grants option in the menu. And so that option takes us to a grants page that lists all of the grants in the system, and you can see each one has the project number and then the name of the agency that administers the grant. We click on one of them, we get a listing of all of the articles in the bibliography associated with that particular grant. And then if we look at the detail information for one of the articles, just like in PubMed, down at the bottom of the page, there's a list of all the grants that helped support the research that was published in this article. It can be a very long list. And with that, I've addressed the 3 challenges. This is just a start. As I mentioned before, Reporter provides information about NIH and US government grants only. So I'm still looking for other sources of data for other types of grants, like those from public funders and international organizations. And this slide has a few really good resources for using the Batch API and the Queue API in Drupal. And with that, I will take questions. Yeah?
So I'm curious if you had to account for this in your content workflow, because the cron runs on a scheduled cadence, but meanwhile you have people setting up and publishing articles. So did you have to account for, like, you can't publish until this data is fetched, or can it publish and then update later?
So currently, I'm the only one working on this project. So, and the article information, it actually is pulled from various bibliographic databases on an, it's user initiated because it's a batch process, but it's essentially automated. So there aren't people going into the system and publishing articles.
Okay.
But if they did, when they created a new article, the PubMed ID for that article would simply be fed into the queue, and the update would happen as cron runs. So there wouldn't be an issue there.
Okay, thank you.
2 questions. Just curious, how often the batch process ran, and then how long it would typically take to run?
I'm sorry, you're talking about the process for getting the queues for
Exactly.
getting the.
Yeah.
Our sites run on Pantheon, so Pantheon basically has your cron run every hour. And I've allowed 60 seconds for the publication's queue processing, and the project's queue processing allows 120 seconds. So that's 60 requests per cron run for publications and 120 for projects. So I also do a little bit of checking to see, like, is the project already in the system?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't actually do
Sure.
as many requests. Yeah.
Yeah, on the piece where you had the page and then you appended the list of projects and agencies to the bottom of it,
Mhm.
did you add that into the content? Did you, main content of the article, create a separate field?
Yeah, it's an entity reference field. It's taxonomy terms. Every grant is a taxonomy term, so it's just
okay,
it's
so
like
it
tagging
adds
the article with the
Got it, thank you.
yeah.
So source data ever updated in a way that would require an update to need to come into your system? So I'm assuming it's all kicked off by the creation of a new record.
Yes.
So after the record's created, is there ever a chance where you might need to update that information?
I don't think so. Mostly because the grant, whatever grants funded that particular publication, aren't really going to change. I've done a lot of. I've been very careful with this project to make sure that the data that I'm collecting is only that which is evergreen, or pretty much. I mean, there are retractions and corrections, but outside of that, I'm not collecting stuff that changes on a regular basis, so that I don't have that kind of management overhead, because it is just me at the moment.
Nice.
Yeah.
How do you handle failures, or like failures in the secondary call? You know, you get the thing and then the second thing fails, and yeah.
So actually, that's a great question. I mean, you can catch exceptions and things like that. The nice thing about it is, if there is a failure, you can just requeue the item, and then let it wait for the next cron run, assuming it was like a transient failure. I have logs checking for this sort of thing, so if there was like a recurring failure, then that would be an indication of a problem. But, you know, hopefully, you know, the service is maybe only out temporarily sometimes, and so that could happen. But then you just requeue. Yeah.
I was wondering, in order to avoid processing an item that's already been processed in the past, what strategy did you use between queuing everything and then checking while you're processing the queue, or checking before and avoid queuing stuff that doesn't need to be processed?
Well, I'm only ever queuing the new stuff, thankfully. That code for actually adding stuff to the queue is part of in my code, part of the batch process that actually creates the new article nodes. So I'm only ever queuing anything that's new, and then once it's done, I'd have to like requeue things manually if I wanted to rerun something.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
All
I
right.
guess that.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
Good job.